The FDA news, that's a historical kind of milestone because it's the first software medical device with a patient-facing LLM that's been cleared, and it's the first FDA-cleared clinical AI platform, as we're aware of it. And, it's not designed to replace doctors.
Hey everyone, welcome to Leadership Rounds, a podcast shining a spotlight on exceptional clinician executives thriving and driving innovation at the intersection of business and healthcare. I'm your host, Dr. Reena Pande, and together we'll explore the wisdom and insights of great healthcare executives and craft a prescription for leadership success, one candid conversation at a time. So I'm thrilled, Sharif, to have you with me on the podcast today. As you know, and I know you're kindred spirit in this regard, I have started this podcast as a way to really highlight extraordinary clinician executives who are doing amazing things at the intersection of clinical care, but also business and data and tech. And you are a perfect example of that. So Sharif Vakili, CEO of UpDoc and a physician yourself, thrilled to have you join me on the podcast today.
The pleasure's all mine. Thank you for having me, Reena.
So there's so many things we can talk about, and there's hot off the presses news from the FDA that we're going to have to get to. But actually, I just want to start with your story. And in doing my homework for this episode, I actually discovered that you yourself hosted a podcast not dissimilar to this one, with a super clever title.
Host is a strong word. It's a strong word.
Well, years of episodes looking back, called "The Doctor Is Out," which is a super clever title. But you share inspiration with this podcast, right? And looking for folks who have done non-traditional paths. But I think you probably appreciate that was in the early 2020s, right? We've moved further in terms of having great clinical executives. We still have a lot of work to do, which is why I'm doing this work at Oxyan and this podcast. But take us through your story, like for listeners who don't know you. Tell us your story.
Yeah, sure. I guess starting from roots, I grew up in New York on Long Island. I'm Persian American. This is part of my culture and background, but I've actually never been to Iran. I went to college at Yale, which was the most incredible experience. I was so grateful. I got so lucky to have such an experience. And while I was there, I was interested in everything. I actually almost considered even going to music conservatory at one point from high school. Yeah. And I was the kind of person who just loved everything. And I have a math and sciences bent. I think just is also my personality, though, thrived in the caretaker, customer service, just like talking to people environment. And matching that with my interests in sciences, medicine felt like a very natural fit. But then I'm also a relentlessly curious, almost annoyingly curious person. And in high school, my yearbook said I have 2 questions. It's like my quote. I don't. It's earnest, but this is just, I don't know. One of the quirks people know me. I've always been like,
I love that.
Medicine allows you to understand life and existence from like the molecular genetic scale to the psychosocial interpersonal scale that I just find incredibly fulfilling to understand. And then part of me also wants to understand this extraordinary dissonance between the beauty of the clinical practice of medicine and how evidence-based it is, and how rigorous it is, and rational and empirical and logical it is, and the absurdity of the system in which it takes place. And I could not understand why. I still struggle. I mean, it's been a lifelong journey to understand this behemoth that is U.S. healthcare, just how our system functions and why does anything cost the way it is and why are incentives set up this way. And I ended up going to business school because I just wanted to learn it. And I was like, if I didn't use anything at business school, I'd be happy. I just want to learn it.
Yeah.
And so I went to business school in the middle of medical school. I went straight through from college to med school. I was at Hopkins for med school. I was at Harvard for business school. And then, well, I'm happy to pause there. We're talking a lot. And then there's how I got into my career, but that's sort of the origins of that for me.
Yeah, I love that. The things that stand out for me are the relentless curiosity and the questioning. I love your yearbook. Like, I'm thinking back to what I had in my yearbook. I had a quote. It must have been like Ralph Waldo Emerson or something. I should know like to whom it was attributed, but it was basically simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. And it's part of a poem. Now I'm gonna have to go back and look at my old yearbook, but it's probably true to how I think about things. Like, how do you go back to first principles is something I say not infrequently. So I love your harkening back.
That's beautiful. I could really use that quote. I want to keep that one with me.
I love it. I'll have to think about to whom it was attributed. But I love the story, and there's even more to your story than you're sharing here. You had a stint actually at Polaris Ventures, right, as a venture capitalist, and now an entrepreneur. But maybe let's dig into like how you got from the story you just told to UpDoc as
Sure.
a founder. And I want you to share the story of the company, but we're also in this very special moment of AI, right?
Yeah.
And you guys sit in one part of that AI story that we're experiencing right now as a healthcare industry. So would love like your personal journey to becoming an entrepreneur, and then maybe tell the story of UpDoc and how it fits in the current moment.
Yeah. So I feel I've always had an entrepreneurial bend throughout my life. Um, I was like the kid who would like uh, flip like iPhones in high school or something. Right when the first iPhone came out, I didn't get the second one, and then in college we would sell swag. It was for a charity organization, but it was like all around campus, all this college swag, um, and then in medical school, I like built a patient tracking device with a Raspberry Pi, and it published in literature. So I've always had this little bend to myself, and um, I with that interest, I discovered venture as a venue through which I can marry those interests in early stage company creation, and also the broad intellectual interests across biotech and health services. Because I knew I always wanted to practice medicine and do something else. But that something else, I couldn't really decide. Again, the indecisiveness between the deep sciences. I loved reading papers about new, signaling cascades and the therapies and new targets that come out of it, and the extraordinary technology coming out in the biotech industry. But then also the classic bread and butter CAC, LTV businesses that go to market and healthcare with different customers and understanding, the complexity of how all that works. And so venture married that, and I worked at a fund called Polaris Partners. I was there for 7 years. It was full-time, part-time, full-time. And that was my original plan. I wasn't planning to start a company. I loved it. I had a mentor in business school who was an MD, MBA. We said, Sharif, if you like practicing medicine 5 days a week, you'll love practicing medicine 1 day a week. And he was right. I mean, like I finally got through trading, and I was working as a venture capitalist. I was seeing patients 2.5 days a week. It was so grounding. And I was working as an investor, which is, by the way, one of the most incredible, highest privileged jobs that you could have, in my humble opinion. But without planning, I ended up kind of stumbling to starting UpDoc. Like it was this like curiosity. It was this something that I couldn't let go of during a conversation with one of my originally co-residents at the time, and then fellow faculty members at Stanford. Ashwin Nayak, who's now the CTO of the UpDoc, is my co-founder, better half of the company, who himself is a software engineer boarding in clinical informatics. And what we were noticing was, this was back in 2020. COVID had just hit. There were so many RPM companies that were emerging. And they were so perplexing to me because I did not understand it. They were, partially because of the billing requirements. These companies were being created with the objective of collecting 16 days of data a month for your patient. And I'm like, when do I need 16 days of data? Up to 30 days. And like these things were popping up, and it became such a big area of focus, which is important, care at the home, and it helps patients close some of the gaps. But we identified a new care delivery model on what if we could digitally close the loop on that. Because the thing is that physicians, most of these chronic disease management programs, whether it's an RPM program or otherwise, they typically fragment care delivery. This is why a lot of health systems don't.
Say more about that. What do you mean by they fragment? I think I know what you mean, but I just want to double click there.
Yeah. So, I could have my patients in some employer program or some program by some vendor, and I have no idea.
Sure.
As their primary care doctor. And because their business model is you cannot rely on the PCP to necessarily refer you a patient. You've got to go grab the patient yourself. And maybe they'll tell the patient, oh, Dr. Vakili wanted you on this program. We're not going to know about the program. But it's physicians' behavior is hard to change. We just do things the way that we're used to. We're creatures of habits, and a workflow is creatures of habits. And so if you're trying to go to market quickly, invariably, and then there's these codes being created to like collect data, you're going to end up with all these things popping up that have a risk sometimes of creating duplicative care, just care outside the normal flows.
Yeah, and candidly, that's how we did it at Able to all those years, delivering behavioral health care, and it wasn't remote patient monitoring; it was actual, cognitive behavioral therapy, just delivered remotely. But to your point about integration or lack thereof with the rest of the healthcare system, too often we regretted that too often it was sitting in as much as we were trying to break down silos between behavioral and physical health care. In fact, we were treating over here and very often not integrated with the patient's rest of the patient's care. So
it's interesting you mentioned that, because I feel like behavioral health, there's almost like more socially acceptable. I mean, even historically, the way our payment system is set up and the benefits, it's separate. And you don't need a PCP's referral. And it's kind of, we've got accustomed to just allowing the patient to go ahead and do that separately from the, rest of the system.
More with the way the system actually works. But ironically, like my whole POV and like the whole point was to try to break down the silos between behavioral health and medical health, which we did in the patient encounter because the care was being delivered very much in the context of the patient's chronic medical or acute medical challenges, cardiac, onc, et cetera. But yes, this point about being not well connected to the rest of their primary care and other, that resonates. So I see what you mean by fragmented, and especially true for RPM companies who are just trying to collect that data and might not be feeding it back to primary care doc. So keep going. Sorry, I interrupted you there.
Well, this is perfect. No, this is a perfect now on-ramp. Is just like the insight was simply that you can integrate when you have a digital solution that is able, like imagine you had a digital solution where you can deploy a labor force that fastidiously follows exactly what the physician wants with a click of a button that the physician makes.
Yes.
Right? It's like, it's no longer this vendor giving this some like program that has some variable outcome and grabbing the patient, but it's kind of like it's the physician closing the loop as part of the same breath of them delivering care.
Yes.
And that was RPI. That was the realization where we're seeing all the gap in the field of RPM and RPIs. It's just RPM data close the loop to deliver clinical AI. And so there's another term. There's like two terms it's so novel, these models, that we had to like, even internally, we have all these terms that we
and RPI
make sure we're all
RPI, right, which you guys basically coined, is remote patient intervention versus RPM, remote patient monitoring. So it's really, as you're describing, closing that loop between just collecting the data and actually making a change in response to the data, right? That is, you know, intertwined with the actual care that the primary care doc or other is intending to deliver.
That's right. And the specific definition is RPI, remote patient intervention, equals RPM data or some remote monitoring data
Okay.
acted on by a clinical AI to deliver care. And clinical AI is defined as this is a term we use instead of AI doctor. It's we think in a more important threshold, and it's where people use clinical AI in many different ways. The way we're trying to redefine it, just as in the context of agentic patient-facing care delivery, is that true clinical AI is when an AI does something that would have historically taken place in an encounter with a licensed provider. It's that threshold. That's what it means to truly close the loop. That the clinical AI is starting a med, stopping med, something, you know, the resident can do when they sign the order button, but the medical student wouldn't do. So yeah, and obviously there's multiple forms of clinical AI. You can have clinical AI that doesn't, you know, close the loop on remote monitoring data, but that wouldn't be RPI.
Yes, understood. Yeah. So let's say more, because and I'd love to hear you describe how what you guys are doing is differentiated from other clinical AI platforms. Some of which are not integrated with with a patient's routine care or their electronic health record. I think dissimilar from what you guys are doing. So I'd just love to hear how you fit, because there are others in the space, right, that are trying to do something similar. And I think what you guys do is unique.
Yeah. So, you know, I think what others have done so far have been a little bit more direct to consumer oriented. It was sort of like we discussed like the Dr. Chat GPT, which is the general zeitgeist of like an AGI doctor. And our system is enterprise facing. It's EHR integrated. And it coordinates with the physician. It drops a note like a physician drops a note in the chart. And it's more longitudinal than, you know, like you can imagine Dr. ChatGPT might be really well suited for what I describe as like the hims and hers medications that care can take place in the vacuum. If my patient is going without my knowledge, you know, to some Dr. ChatGPT and getting hair loss medications, probably fine, you know. But if they're managing their heart failure, like it's step on toes. They might not know the full clinical maybe I'm doing something based on a recent echo that their cardiologist had ordered based on a prior EP study. Like it's something you need to be careful with, and it's something that it's like the chatbot is like the tiniest piece of the platform. It's really hard to
And even as what might
fully
sound
describe.
as simple as like drug interactions, not knowing what a patient has gone through some of these medications.
Oh yeah.
Yes, could be
Drug interactions, lab
yeah,
adjustment for renal function. Yep.
absolutely right. Somebody checking a potassium after you change the lisinopril, right? Like, who's monitoring that? And if you're not integrated with the EHR and no labs and other data about someone, it could be terribly problematic. I mean, it could be fatal potentially, right? If you're not doing it thoughtfully.
Yeah. There's so many complexities and nuances once you get. I think the field will start to understand the 30,000-foot view, but all the work happens in the 0 to 1, and yeah, I can't even begin to enumerate
I love
all
it.
the walls we had to bash our heads against and get through.
So let's go to like the hot off the presses news. And it's so funny. I got a text from my son yesterday, who's an engineer, not in healthcare, but like maybe we can get him over to the healthcare side at some point in his career. And he sent me some New York Times article, not about you guys, but about some other AI, ChatGPT AI, right? And he wrote, "Doctors are getting replaced." It was very cute. My 22-year-old son, telling me that we're going to be disappearing. And we had a fun back and forth by text on this topic. And I told him we were talking today and that I wanted to talk with you about this exciting new news, right? Which is the FDA clearance for UpDoc, specific to diabetes, specific to insulin management. But tell us about that, and how that came to be and why it matters. That there's a FDA approval for this work now.
Yeah. So the FDA news, like that's a historical kind of milestone because it's the first software medical device with a patient-facing LLM that's been cleared, and it's the first FDA cleared clinical AI platform, as we're aware of it. And it's not designed to replace doctors. I mean, there's another reason why we don't want to use AI. Well, it's technically doing work. It's not just doctor. It's licensed, nurse practitioner, physician assistant, that kind of work. But it also, at the same time, it's never replacing the vast majority of things that a human is important for. It's just changing the care delivery model so that the work that they're doing can be higher value, more exception management, more maybe spend more time with their patients.
Yes.
Right. And I think it's not the case that these solutions are like you need even tighter integration. And if you done thoughtfully, you should be able to use these tools to strengthen the patient-physician relationship.
I love that.
It's like this used right should not be doing old things in a new way. We should be doing new things in a new way. The other thing too is we need some payment reform to make sure this happens as well, because the relationship between clinicians and clinical AI really comes down to how the ecosystem respects and prices in different people's time. Because the last thing we want, technology does this so frequently. We see this with the EHR, classically managed care solutions also. It's like when technology gets adopted, there are a lot of beneficiaries, but oftentimes the clinician's extra work and coordination becomes part of somebody else's margin. So all of that is necessary for these solutions to be developed and scaled in a way that is the best for patients, right by clinicians. It just makes like the entire health system ecosystem, the model of care delivery that'll emerge and the relationship between all these pieces will be on the backs of how we reform payments and incentives.
Yeah, for sure. That has long been core to some of the problems we face, right? To your point about 16 days of remote patient monitoring, right? Earlier, right? It's all of these things are driven by what you can get paid for, which is not how we should make decisions in healthcare, of course, but is what drives decisions far too often in healthcare, right? I mean, it's a good question that is coming to my mind as you're talking, though. Like, remind me how you guys get paid for these services then. You're enterprise focused. Are you paid by hospital systems, or is there a payment mechanism for UpDoc through the traditional claim system?
We're not fully disclosing exactly yet, but what I can say is that health systems pay us, and we need to, in a value-based care environment, like a true value-based care environment, these incentives work really, really well, right? Like you've got a clinical workforce, you're trying to scale them, use a clinical AI tool as part of the labor force, you're going to hire that, and they're just going to help your PCP manage a larger panel of patients or manage the same panel of patients and spend more time with their patients so they can deliver the care that they need to, or maybe a little mix of both. And What we need to ultimately get to, though, is a world in the fee-for-service environment where the physician can be paid for the work that is scaled by their clinical AI solutions. Because right now they can only bill based on their time. So if they use any tool in the asynchronous world that improves their productivity, they get paid less and they're penalizing themselves. So if you're in what I call like a coin operated environment, this becomes a really big problem.
Yes.
But yeah, hopefully that gives enough of a sense.
Yeah,
to the audience to
totally.
understand.
I mean, I think the idea that this is so impactful in a value-based care environment, right? If you're moving away from the coin-operated laundry to outcomes driving payment. Again, I don't know how exactly guys are paid, but it's so logical, right? And it's this shift that we've talked about before between this episodic and a more continuous. It's the holy grail to move to a actual continuous care approach versus episodic. But the payment structure values episodic. Care happens in a continuous way. Humans function in a continuous way, right? So I love that you're shifting from the old model to this more continuous approach to care. Right?
Yeah. And you've got to kind of be really thoughtful about how you can bring the fee-for-service chassis up to there so that you can get to, the system to operate well on an outcomes environment. I know Access is making some progress on this front. There's more progress to be done, and I'm excited for this. But there's a real opportunity for us for this kind of technology, truly to break some of those growing pains where we're constantly trying to push the system to get more value based, because the ability to audit, have two-sided agreements, and digitize workflows and billing is unprecedented. And this can really help. This is one of the problems of value-based care has always been it creates more administrative burden, and then it can be gamed and all this stuff. And
Right.
I mean, any kind of thing can be, but there should be increased honesty when there's digitization of things that would otherwise be
Yes.
hidden from view.
So I want to switch gears on us a bit and talk about talent. And we've talked about the product and the place we are, the moment we are in AI. But there's another moment that we are in, which is a moment where the role of the clinician in building and deploying these kind of solutions is shifting. And I've heard you talk about this in a different way, fundamentally different way than I've heard other people talk about it, like looking for clinician engineers, clinician product folks, clinician QA team members. And I would just love to hear your take on talent and where the clinician's role is and why the clinician is so critical in building AI solutions.
With clinical AI, I mean, it's so critical that there is an extremely tight interface between engineering and clinical. I mean, you're scaling the clinical practice in medicine, right? And the ways in which you do that, you must make sure that people who are on the ground and understand these nuances intimately are touching every single inch of surface area of the product. And so we've been looking for physician engineer talent, which is a very hard phenotype to find, because clinical training takes a long time, and engineering itself is a different vertical. More people are vibe coding these days, but and that goes to helps some bit to have some experience with the latest models to understand how things interface, but it can only get you so far as you're thinking about back-end architecture, how to make sure
Right.
everything comes together. You have to have some fundamental engineering knowledge too, which informs so much, on how like how this manifests as a patient's experience. So, I think it shouldn't. I hope it wouldn't be surprised. Maybe I'm biased here. So we have so many physicians, and we've hired more. I think about a third of the company are physicians, or maybe
Love that.
even a little more. Yeah. So I- we what do you think? It shouldn't be surprising that a clinical AI company is going to have a lot of physicians in it by virtue of what it's doing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't think it's a surprise, but I think there's a lot of healthcare tech that still happens without the clinician voice deeply ingrained in product development. I think you are unique that you
Yeah.
have 1/3 of your employee base as physicians. There are other companies
think
out there,
that's
and I've
about
been
right.
chatting with like a host of great clinician leaders who are building and leading AI companies now. This is a little theme I'm doing. You're included in that,
Yeah.
but I think it's still unusual.
I'd say I have two reflections on that. One is I remember talking to Michelle Longmire, the CEO of my last podcast, the CEO of Medable. Medable, is that right? The CRO. I apologize, Michelle, if I'm misremembering the name of your company right now. But uh, uh, she pointed out that study after study, statistics after statistic, physician healthcare entrepreneurs are more successful than the you know non-physician healthcare entrepreneurs. Not that I don't want anybody who's a non-physician to feel discouraged. Absolutely, want companies just to say that. I'm saying to the physicians, don't be discouraged, because I
Yes.
think that's the bigger problem sometimes, where the field can feel intimidating or feels like you're an outsider, and it's we know more than we realize, and being able to be thoughtful around these questions. Um, the second thing is I think there's a little bit of homophily to play potentially, where um, I, as an MD MBA, know what an MD MBA has gone through, so I trust that experience, and therefore I can hire that more quickly and understand what I'm going to get. Um, and I think that's true of every industry. Like, you see these venture funds where they're all MDs, and then there are venture funds where they're all people of, and operators, or,
Yeah.
and I think it's just, there's a little bit of birds of a feather flock
You know what you
together.
know. Yeah, and you trust what you know, right?
Yeah.
Yes. But
So
so
that's
same
my
word though
reflections
on
there.
that the first point you made, right, which is the success that your friend Michelle can identify in physician or clinician entrepreneurs. What do you think drives that? Other than just bringing the clinical knowledge, because we all know there's clinicians who are phenomenal in the clinic, and that's where they will drive their best value. And there are clinicians who are phenomenal as entrepreneurs, and that's where they drive their best value, right? But what do you think? What are the qualities and characteristics that make for, and that drive that success?
I think the thing about that differentiates clinicians is the get it factor. I cannot count the number of times I've had conversations with very important people. I say that in like quotes, um, who don't get it at all, and it's very frustrating. I'm just trying to learn to, like, you know not get a little bit, I don't know, try to keep a poker face in those moments, I guess. And
I feel you.
it's yeah, yeah. And it's just because, like, if you the nuances and subtleties of the clinical practice of medicine, and what's interesting in solid health systems is um, how oftentimes people who make big decisions um, um, can well, I'll say two things. When I see that get it factor in a non-clinician, and I see it often too, and I see it on many health systems, it um, it delights me. I'm so proud. I'm like, yeah, I'm so glad to see you here. You're like, those little bricks are what makes the health system better, you know. Um, but also I get surprised when, like, there's like that's lost, and, like, the systems are making big decisions, and so I think that's the number one biggest thing. And then to your other questions on entrepreneurial drive, I think there's something to certain personalities maybe people say risk-taking personalities. I think it's resilience and like a relentless, um, maybe manic is one word. Maybe another is just like hopelessly optimistic. But you could be a curmudgeon and still be an entrepreneur if you're a little manic. Um, and just like because you run through entrepreneurship is just about running through walls and keep going
Yeah.
over and over and over again, and having both the humility to recognize you know nothing, and if you know 20% of what you're doing, you're ahead, but also with the like schizophrenic. I know that word's not being used for appropriately here, but like just like the contradictory um uh uh
The duality,
belief
right?
that the duality of like everyone is saying no, and then it it's until it happens, everyone will everyone will think after it's happened, oh yeah, of course that's the way to do it. The number of times that I've had people come and say like, oh well, people can just go do this, or I'm like, do you realize this is the most complex product that a healthcare system has probably ever seen since an EHR? Like it's just like I just like I'm like, are you're looking for um it, it's like it seems always obvious in hindsight. We see this oftentimes with like disruptive technologies. Um, and it's like the frustration where like before it, everyone's like, you can't do it. And then afterwards, it's like, oh yeah, well, this tower is going to be all along. And
Right.
I'm like, oh gosh.
Yes. Oh,
So,
I felt that in my Able to days, in the early 2010s when nobody cared about virtual care delivery, period.
right.
And nobody cared about mental health, period. And now we're in a world where everybody, you don't even flinch to think about getting your therapy online from a massive, company that's doing billions of dollars in revenue, right? It's so fascinating. And now, for us, it was simple ideas, not even technologically complex ideas, but the idea that like you should integrate behavioral health care and medical health, and that mental health can have an impact on overall health and well-being was like foreign. And now, of course, yes. So I'm very non-technical aha moments, but it's neat to see. One is, on the one hand, it's frustrating, but on the other, it's like, yeah, we did that, right? You did this. You made something super complex and technical and innovative become commonplace. And I think that is also part of the beauty of entrepreneurship, that when you do that, you've succeeded.
Yeah, and this actually, I'm like trying to remind myself this expression. What was it?
Yeah.
The audience will have to keep me honest. There's something that's like a Dud Kerning effect or something or effect where it's the more you know about something, the less you think you know.
Yes. Yeah. What is
And
that
the less
called?
you,
I can't remember.
yeah, it's a something effect.
You and I both are missing this little detail in our brains.
The less,
Well, then we'll look it
and
up.
then
We'll look it up and then we'll cut this. We'll
yeah,
cut this.
Dunning-Kruger effect. Dunning-Kruger effect. I just looked it up. Dunning-Kruger. So this is an interesting phenomenon in entrepreneurship too, because the having been on the venture side, and like it's there's like humility is necessary on all sides here to solve problems. But again, it's like that weird duality, that weird, right? And so the Dunning-Kruger effect says, people who know a lot about a topic underestimate their performance in it. People who know very little bit about a topic overestimate their performance in it. And this is something you got to be careful for, be careful about as well as an entrepreneur, because you may think you understand something, particularly because you're thinking about it more than anybody else. And then somebody's coming in who knows nothing about it and like tells you something you don't know. And you've got to always navigate that duality to learn, and being careful of biases. Because we'll go back to curiosity. That's how you solve your business model and solve how to, be able to
Yeah. I love
build
that.
something very special.
Yeah, I love that. Just if we're going to run out of time soon, so I wanted to ask one more question about talent quickly, which is a third of your company is physicians, some of whom are engineers.
Yeah.
Where are you finding the talent, and are we training the next generation of clinicians, physicians and others, to be ready to be the workforce we need for the innovation of today and that's coming in the future?
Great question. So on the former side, I think just by virtue of going to all these fancy schools and having my podcast, and I was like the president and co-president of the healthcare club at HBS, I've developed a big physician network, and that's been helpful because I can trust people, particularly MD MBAs. That said, this is where Oxyon is extremely important for more senior folks in particular that you need. It's just very, very critical for companies at a critical stage of the hires. But for ICs, we've been able to find folks through our network. And in terms of training, at least for a company like UpDoc, but there's probably some generalizability in the ecosystem and industry, there is a unique perspective that MD MBAs and or just MDs who have some industry experience can bring. And I think that side of understanding both the business and medicine of this field is important, and trying to marry those two because you'll always be a nice layer of cohesion and glue to conversations in different environments. Physician engineers, I don't know of many formal programs in that capacity. And, if you're a physician and you're just looking to clinically train and not do anything for practice medicine, that's also fantastic, right? Right? Like that's
Absolutely agree.
that is a slog. And the trouble is that art that you're mastering is very separate art from being an engineer. That probably doesn't slot in well, and I don't think it pays as well. Actually, that's not necessarily true. I'm sure if you're an IC actually at one of these big tech companies, you probably get paid exactly the same as you would as a physician, believe it or not. But if you're able to squeeze that in, there will always be roles for you. And digital health.
So interesting.
So those are my reflections there.
And one related talent question, which isn't about physician engineers or people to come work in business, but how might we train the next generation of clinicians who are delivering care to be receptive of the types of technology that you're building and others are building, and to incorporate them successfully into the practice of medicine on the ground?
It's such an interesting question. My first reaction to that is that the technology needs to be one also that is one that the clinician wants to without friction employ. Like we should not be changing clinicians. Like ideally, the technology requires no change to how the clinician practice medicine is trained. Just meets them where they're at. And so it just happens organically and just through the same breath, as I said earlier, like for normal clinical practice. But I do think that with these AI tools, clinical acumen becomes more important because they can increase the risk of becoming deskilled. That's the biggest concern. I mean, particularly, and this is interesting, I think if we do this thoughtfully, the gap between a mid-level provider and a physician should increase because mid-levels will be able to utilize these tools in a more economical way. But you need to make sure that the physician doesn't get lazy and kind of deskills themselves towards a mid-level, relying on AI tools. And I think there's first studies on this, like emerging for some of these tools causing that. So I'd say like for the future, it's just really important that as much as possible, it's like being a writer, make sure you can write before you use these new tools, and then also use the tools to be thoughtful.
Yeah.
And keep an eye out of the tools. Just be aware of all the ecosystem. And that's a function, I think, of physicians having time during their training to think, reflect, be involved in things greater than just their clinical practice, as well as, in their professional careers. And I think it'll fall into place.
Yeah, I love that perspective. So last question, maybe we'll leave our listeners with harkening back to your sense of optimism and curiosity. if you had a crystal ball and you're looking forward, like what are you optimistic about in healthcare and technology? What would you say is giving you hope?
I am so optimistic. I mean, this is maybe I'm biased. Healthcare has made me so sad for so long. But what can be uniquely American, like the same thing that causes us to have this like obscenity of a healthcare system, the same drivers might be able to have the United States be at the forefront of using digital tools. And like, we're really good on the planet in creating these technological, tools, sometimes that have negative effects. So you'll need to make sure you are very thoughtful. But like half of the market cap of maybe it's more now of like the market comes out of Silicon Valley in the 50 miles surrounding area, and that's what we're really, really good at. And historically, that has been very challenging. All these digital health tools that have come to be, like you don't see it in any numbers, right? Decreasing healthcare costs or improving fundamental outcomes. But if we touch on clinical AI, you fully close the loop, and you're able to change the care delivery model, and you're able to use those tools to create honesty and the ways things are priced, cost tracked, etc. You have an opportunity, so long again, like the incentives are set up properly, to reimagine what care can be in a way that could be a forefront leading archetype for other systems, and really take advantage of that entrepreneurial engine that we're so lucky to have in this country. So that's giving me some hope. It's scary because we've never like done this race entirely, but we have an opportunity to. We completely do. We have all the pieces.
I love that. Thank you for that. I'm optimistic too, and always looking around corners to see what exciting new thing we can do to make things better. Your brain clearly works that way. I love that. So I think this has been an extraordinary conversation. You're so awesome. I so appreciate you coming and joining the podcast and sharing your story and the UpDoc's story. Congrats on the FDA clearance. It's just a milestone in where we are in clinical AI. And you use the word proud of your, when you see great physicians doing great work. I have that sense as I'm talking to you. I just love it. So appreciate you making time, carving out time to chat here today.
My privilege. Thank you, Reena. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Leadership Rounds, where clinician executives share wisdom and insights on what it means to be an exceptional leader in healthcare. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please subscribe, comment, and share with your friends and fellow leaders in healthcare. Join us next time for another dose of leadership wisdom. Until then, I'm Dr. Reena Pande. Thanks for listening.